In the cold morning mist of a military training ground, a single gunshot echoed across the silence. Then another. And another. Each bullet found its mark with deadly precision, defying every attempt to make her fail. What started as a cruel conspiracy to destroy one woman's military career became the most legendary shooting display in modern warfare history. When Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez picked up her rifle that final day, her superiors expected humiliation. Instead, they witnessed 167 consecutive perfect shots that would rewrite the record books and expose a corruption scandal that reached the highest levels of military command. This is the true story of how sabotage, betrayal, and institutional bias transformed an ordinary soldier into an extraordinary marksman whose name would be whispered with reverence in sniper circles for generations to come. Sometimes the greatest victories are born from the deepest betrayals, and sometimes the target isn't what you think it is. Maria Rodriguez had always been different from other soldiers in the 82nd Airborne Division. While her male counterparts spent their evenings drinking beer and playing poker in the barracks, she could be found on the shooting range long after sunset, her silhouette barely visible in the fading light, as she practiced with an intensity that made even the drill sergeants uncomfortable. She had grown up in rural Texas, where her father taught her to hunt before she could properly tie her shoes. By age 12, she could drop a running deer at 300 yards with her grandfather's weathered Winchester rifle. By 16, she was winning state competitions against men twice her age. When she enlisted in the Army at 18, everyone knew she was destined for something special. But the military in 2019 was still struggling with integrating women into combat roles, especially in elite units like sniper teams. Maria's exceptional marksmanship scores during basic training had caught the attention of Colonel James Mitchell, the commanding officer of the base's sniper school. Her scores weren't just good, they were unprecedented. During her qualification round, she had achieved a perfect score of 40 out of 40 targets at varying distances up to 800 meters. Colonel Mitchell was old-school military, a man who believed that certain roles were meant for men only. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had never worked with a female sniper. The idea of a woman in his program didn't sit well with him, but Maria's scores were impossible to ignore. Reluctantly, he approved her application for advanced sniper training, but he made it clear to his staff that he expected her to wash out quickly. The sniper school was located in a remote section of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The facility was Spartan, consisting of a few concrete buildings surrounded by vast training ranges that stretched for miles into the wilderness. When Maria arrived for her first day of training, she was the only woman among 32 candidates. The other soldiers looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. Some whispered jokes about her presence, while others simply ignored her entirely. Sergeant First Class Tom Bradley was the primary instructor for the program. He was a lean, weathered man in his 40s who had spent most of his career as a sniper in various conflict zones. Like his commanding officer, Bradley harbored serious doubts about women in combat roles. He had seen too many soldiers die in battle to believe that physical differences didn't matter when lives were on the line. From the very first day, Maria noticed that she was being treated differently from the other candidates. While her male counterparts received detailed explanations of shooting techniques and wind calculations, Bradley would give her abbreviated instructions and move on quickly. When she asked questions, he would respond with impatience, suggesting that she should already know the answers if she belonged in the program. Despite the cold treatment, Maria excelled in the classroom portions of the training. She absorbed information about ballistics, weather effects on bullet trajectory, and target identification with remarkable speed. Her test scores consistently ranked in the top 3 among all candidates, but she began to notice discrepancies in her practical exercises that troubled her deeply. During live-fire exercises, Maria would line up her shots perfectly, feeling confident in her aim and calculations. But when the targets were scored, her results were often marked as misses or barely acceptable hits. She would examine the targets herself and see clean holes exactly where she had aimed, but the instructors would point to different marks and claim those were her shots. At first, Maria thought she might be making mistakes she wasn't aware of. She began keeping detailed notes of every shot, recording weather conditions, her sight adjustments, and her intended point of impact. But the more carefully she documented her performance, the more obvious it became that something was wrong. Her calculations were correct, her shooting form was textbook perfect, and she could see her bullet holes hitting exactly where she intended. Yet her official scores continued to be poor. The psychological pressure was intense. Maria had never failed at anything involving marksmanship in her life. She began to doubt her abilities and wondered if the stress of the training environment was affecting her performance in ways she didn't understand. She spent hours each night reviewing her notes and practicing dry fire exercises in her barracks room, trying to identify what she might be doing wrong. Other candidates began to notice the discrepancy as well. Private Johnson, a quiet young man from Montana who had grown up hunting, watched Maria shoot during one exercise and was amazed by her precision. He had been positioned to observe targets downrange and clearly saw her bullets impact exactly where she had called her shots. But when the scores were announced, Maria was ranked near the bottom of the class, while Johnson, who knew his own shots had been less accurate, was scored much higher. Johnson wasn't the only one who noticed. Several other candidates began paying closer attention to Maria's performance and comparing it to the official scores. Word began to spread quietly among the students that something wasn't right. But none of them felt comfortable speaking up against their instructors, especially when it involved defending the only woman in the program. Maria's reputation among the candidates began to improve as they witnessed her actual shooting ability versus her official scores. During informal shooting sessions, she consistently outperformed everyone else by significant margins. Her knowledge of ballistics and wind reading was superior to most of the instructors. Yet in official exercises, she continued to receive failing or barely passing marks. The situation reached a breaking point during the 4th week of training. The class was conducting a stalking exercise, where candidates had to approach within 200 meters of an observation post without being detected, then take a single precision shot at a target. Maria had executed a perfect stalk, approaching to within 150 meters while remaining completely invisible to the observers. Her shot placement was dead center on the target, which she could clearly see through her scope, but when the exercise was scored, she was marked as having missed the target entirely. The instructors claimed that not only had her bullet missed, but that she had been detected during her approach. Both claims were obviously false to anyone who had been paying attention, but Maria had no way to challenge the official assessment without seeming insubordinate. That evening, Johnson approached Maria privately in the mess hall. He told her what he had observed during the exercise and expressed his belief that she was being deliberately sabotaged. He had served as one of the spotters for the observation post and confirmed that she had never been detected during her approach. He had also watched her shot through binoculars and seen it hit the center of the target. Maria felt a mixture of relief and anger at Johnson's confirmation. She wasn't losing her mind or her abilities, but she was being systematically undermined by her own instructors. The question was what to do about it. Johnson suggested that she document everything and report the situation to higher command, but Maria knew that would likely end her military career. Accusations against instructors, especially without concrete proof, were career suicide for enlisted personnel. Instead, Maria decided to work harder and perform so well that even deliberate sabotage couldn't hide her abilities. She began arriving at the range hours before dawn to practice, and she stayed until well after dark. She studied ballistics textbooks and memorized wind tables until she could perform calculations in her head faster than most people could do them with calculators. Her fellow candidates began to respect and admire her dedication. Word of her extraordinary abilities spread beyond the immediate class to other units on the base. Off-duty soldiers would sometimes gather to watch her practice, amazed by shooting displays that seemed almost supernatural in their precision. She began staying later and listening more carefully to conversations in Mitchell's office. She took detailed notes and recorded dates and times of suspicious discussions. Her goal was to gather enough evidence to protect herself if she decided to report the situation later. Meanwhile, Maria continued her intense training regimen, unaware of the plot being developed against her. She had adapted to the hostile environment by focusing entirely on self-improvement and ignoring the obvious bias in her official scores. Her fellow candidates continued to marvel at her abilities during informal training sessions, and several had begun seeking her advice on shooting techniques and ballistics calculations. Private Johnson had become particularly supportive of Maria, often serving as her spotter during practice sessions and helping her document her actual performance versus her official scores. He had grown up in a military family and understood the importance of evidence in challenging authority. Together, they maintained detailed records of every official exercise, including photographs of targets when possible and witness statements from other candidates. Johnson's support extended beyond documentation. He began quietly building a coalition among the other candidates who had witnessed the systematic sabotage of Maria's scores. The group included soldiers from various backgrounds and political perspectives, but they were united by a sense of fairness and respect for Maria's obvious abilities. They began discussing ways to support her without directly challenging their instructors. The training program continued through November, with Maria's official scores remaining poor despite her exceptional actual performance. She had learned to expect failure from her instructors and found motivation in the private knowledge of her true abilities. Her relationship with the other candidates had evolved from mere tolerance to genuine respect and friendship. During a particularly challenging long-range shooting exercise, Maria demonstrated skills that left even Bradley speechless. The targets were positioned at distances ranging from 600 to 1,200 meters, with varying wind conditions and lighting challenges. Maria calculated each shot perfectly, adjusting for wind speed, temperature, and elevation changes with mathematical precision. Every bullet struck exactly where she intended, creating groups so tight that some holes overlapped. But when the official scores were announced, Maria was credited with multiple misses and ranked near the bottom of the class. The discrepancy was so obvious that several candidates openly expressed confusion about the scoring. Bradley shut down discussion by reminding everyone that questioning instructor judgments was considered insubordination. That evening, Johnson organized an informal meeting of candidates in an unused storage building on the base. 15 soldiers attended, representing more than half of the remaining class. The discussion was careful and coded, but the message was clear. Everyone understood that Maria was being treated unfairly, and most believed the sabotage was intentional. The group made several important decisions. They would continue documenting discrepancies between Maria's actual performance and her official scores. They would provide witness statements if Maria ever decided to file a formal complaint, and they would support her during the final demonstration, regardless of what happened. Johnson proposed one additional step that was both bold and dangerous. If the final demonstration was rigged against Maria, the group would be prepared to provide immediate testimony about what they had witnessed throughout the training program. They would break the military tradition of never challenging instructors in public, understanding that doing so might end their own careers. Corporal Chen's intelligence gathering was revealing additional details about Mitchell's plan. She had learned that special demonstration rifles were being prepared for the final event and that Maria's weapon was receiving unusual attention from the armorer. She had also overheard discussions about media coverage and the importance of making a strong impression on visiting officials. Chen faced an ethical dilemma that kept her awake at night. She had enough information to warn Maria about the plot against her, but doing so would expose her own illegal eavesdropping and could be considered espionage against her commanding officers. She also lacked concrete proof of the sabotage plans, having only overheard conversations and observed suspicious activities. After days of internal struggle, Chen made a decision that would prove crucial to the story's outcome. Instead of directly warning Maria, she decided to create an opportunity for Maria to discover the truth herself. Chen knew that Maria often practiced alone on the range during off-duty hours, and she began leaving anonymous notes with subtle hints about equipment reliability and the importance of thorough weapons inspections. Maria initially dismissed the anonymous warnings as pranks or attempts at psychological manipulation, but as she reflected on her experiences in the program, she began to consider the possibility that the sabotage extended beyond scoring discrepancies to actual equipment tampering. She started conducting more thorough inspections of her assigned rifles and noticed subtle inconsistencies that might explain some of her official failures. The revelation that her equipment might be compromised filled Maria with cold fury. She had endured months of psychological pressure, believing that stress was affecting her performance. The possibility that her struggles were caused by deliberate sabotage transformed her frustration into determination for justice. Maria began her own investigation, carefully examining every rifle she was assigned and documenting any irregularities. She enlisted Johnson's help in conducting detailed inspections, using his mechanical knowledge to identify potential problems. What they discovered confirmed their worst suspicions. Rifles assigned to Maria consistently showed signs of tampering, including loose scope mounts, contaminated barrels, and improperly loaded ammunition. The evidence was subtle but unmistakable to trained eyes. Someone with access to the armory was systematically sabotaging Maria's equipment in ways designed to cause poor accuracy without creating obvious malfunctions. The sabotage was sophisticated and required detailed knowledge of ballistics and firearms mechanics. Maria realized that the final demonstration would likely represent the culmination of the conspiracy against her. Everything pointed to a setup designed to humiliate her in front of high-ranking officials and media representatives. But instead of feeling defeated, she began planning her response with the same methodical precision she applied to long-range shooting. She would not allow herself to be sacrificed to institutional prejudice and personal bias. If Colonel Mitchell wanted a demonstration of female capabilities in combat roles, she would give him exactly that. But the demonstration would expose the corruption in his program and establish her as a symbol of excellence that could never be ignored or dismissed. The final battle was approaching, and Maria Rodriguez was preparing to turn her enemy's greatest weapon against them. Maria's investigation into the equipment sabotage revealed a level of systematic corruption that shocked even her. Working with Johnson and 2 other trusted candidates, she had spent weeks documenting evidence of tampering that extended far beyond her own weapons. The conspiracy involved the base armorer, several range instructors, and a network of personnel who shared Colonel Mitchell's views about women in combat roles. The evidence was damning but also dangerous. Maria possessed photographs of tampered equipment, detailed records of scoring discrepancies, and witness statements from multiple candidates. But she also understood that presenting this information through normal military channels would likely result in retaliation against everyone involved. The corruption went too high up the chain of command for internal investigation to be effective. Johnson suggested they contact the Inspector General's office or even civilian media outlets, but Maria had a different plan. She had learned that the final demonstration was scheduled for December 15th, just 3 weeks away. Instead of trying to stop the event or expose the conspiracy beforehand, she decided to use the demonstration as an opportunity to reveal the truth in the most dramatic way possible. Her plan was audacious and risky. She would allow Mitchell and Bradley to execute their sabotage as planned, but she would be prepared with her own equipment to replace the compromised gear at the crucial moment. The public nature of the demonstration would make it impossible for officials to suppress what happened, and the media presence would ensure widespread coverage of any revelations. Maria knew she would need help to execute her plan successfully. She approached Corporal Chen, whom she had identified as the source of the anonymous warnings. Chen was initially terrified by the contact, fearing that her eavesdropping had been discovered. But when Maria explained her plan and asked for Chen's assistance, the supply clerk agreed to help, despite the personal risk. Chen's access to supply records and inventory systems made her invaluable to Maria's preparation. She could track which weapons were being prepared for the demonstration and identify opportunities to access backup equipment. More importantly, she could continue monitoring conversations in Mitchell's office to keep Maria informed about any changes to the sabotage plan. The coalition of supportive candidates expanded as word of Maria's plan spread carefully through the group. Soldiers who had initially been skeptical of Maria's abilities now understood the systematic nature of the injustice against her. Several offered to provide public testimony during the demonstration if needed, despite knowing it would likely end their military careers. Private Rodriguez, a communications specialist who shared Maria's surname but was unrelated, volunteered to document the demonstration with unauthorized recording equipment. He had access to professional quality cameras through his work in the base media office, and he understood the importance of having independent video evidence of whatever happened during the event. The group's planning sessions took place in remote locations around the base, often during early morning physical training runs or late evening maintenance duties. They developed contingency plans for various scenarios, including the possibility that their activities might be discovered before the demonstration. Everyone understood they were risking court-martial and the end of their military careers, but they were united by a sense of justice and respect for Maria's abilities. Meanwhile, Colonel Mitchell was making his own final preparations for what he expected to be Maria's public humiliation. He had personally overseen the preparation of her demonstration rifle, ensuring that multiple forms of sabotage would make accurate shooting impossible. The scope had been deliberately miscalibrated, the barrel had been subtly damaged to affect bullet trajectory, and the ammunition had been loaded with inconsistent powder charges. Mitchell had also arranged for the demonstration to be filmed by military cameramen and attended by journalists from several major publications. He wanted Maria's failure to be widely documented and publicized as proof that the military's experiment with women in elite combat roles had been a mistake. The demonstration would serve his career goals by reinforcing traditional gender roles and justifying his resistance to integration policies. Bradley shared his commanding officer's confidence about the demonstration's outcome. He had personally tested the sabotaged rifle and confirmed that accurate shooting would be virtually impossible. Even an exceptional marksman would struggle to hit targets consistently with the compromised equipment, and Maria would face the additional pressure of performing in front of a hostile audience. What neither Mitchell nor Bradley anticipated was that their own confidence would lead to carelessness in their final preparations. They were so certain of the plan's success that they failed to notice signs of organized resistance among the candidates. Conversations were overheard, activities were observed, and their conspiracy was being documented by people they had dismissed as insignificant. Chen's intelligence gathering had revealed that the demonstration would include a series of increasingly difficult shooting challenges designed to maximize Maria's humiliation. She would be required to engage targets at ranges from 300 to 1,200 meters, including moving targets and small precision targets that demanded perfect accuracy. The final challenge would involve shooting at reactive targets that would fall only when hit in a small central zone. Maria used this intelligence to design her own demonstration plan. She would begin by using the sabotaged equipment as expected, but she would deliberately miss targets in ways that revealed the equipment problems to trained observers. Then, at the crucial moment, she would switch to her own verified equipment and deliver a shooting display that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. The key to Maria's plan was obtaining access to reliable equipment during the demonstration itself. Chen had identified a backup rifle stored in the base armory that matched the specifications of the demonstration weapons. Working with Johnson, they had secretly tested this rifle and confirmed its accuracy. They had also secured a supply of match-grade ammunition that had been purchased privately and stored off-base to avoid tampering. Getting the backup equipment to the demonstration site would require careful coordination and perfect timing. Johnson would position himself as a spotter for other candidates, giving him access to the equipment's staging area. At the predetermined signal, he would retrieve the backup rifle and ammunition while Chen created a distraction that drew attention away from the equipment area. Maria spent hours practicing the equipment transition, learning to swap rifles quickly and smoothly while maintaining her shooting position. She knew she would have only seconds to make the change without alerting Mitchell and Bradley to what was happening. The success of her entire plan depended on executing this transition flawlessly under intense pressure. The psychological preparation was as important as the physical planning. Maria had to be ready to perform at her absolute best while dealing with the stress of public scrutiny, hostile officials, and the knowledge that her entire military career depended on her performance. She used meditation and visualization techniques to maintain focus and control her emotions during high-pressure situations. 3 days before the demonstration, Maria received an unexpected visit from her father, who had driven from Texas to attend the event. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was a retired Army veteran who had served 2 tours in Vietnam as a helicopter door gunner. He had always supported Maria's military ambitions, but he had also warned her about the institutional resistance she would face as a woman in combat roles. Maria's father immediately sensed that something significant was about to happen. He had enough military experience to recognize the signs of preparation and tension that surrounded his daughter and her fellow candidates. When Maria carefully explained the situation, avoiding specific details that might compromise the operation, her father offered his complete support and encouragement. The elder Rodriguez had faced his own battles against prejudice during his military service, and he understood the importance of Maria's planned demonstration. He assured her that regardless of the outcome, she had already proven herself as a soldier and a person. His presence provided Maria with additional motivation and emotional support during the final days of preparation. The night before the demonstration, Maria lay awake in her barracks reviewing every detail of her plan. She had prepared for this moment for months, enduring systematic sabotage and psychological pressure while building the skills and allies necessary for success. Tomorrow would determine not only her own military future, but also the future opportunities for other women seeking to serve in elite combat roles. She thought about all the people who had supported her journey, from her father who taught her to shoot as a child, to Johnson and Chen who had risked their careers to help expose the conspiracy against her. She also thought about the women who would follow in her footsteps, and how her performance might influence their opportunities and treatment. Maria felt no fear or doubt about her shooting abilities. She had spent thousands of hours perfecting her marksmanship skills, and she knew she could deliver the performance necessary to expose the conspiracy and establish her credibility. Her only concern was executing the equipment transition smoothly and avoiding detection until the crucial moment. As dawn approached, Maria prepared her equipment with the methodical precision of a combat veteran. She cleaned and inspected her backup rifle one final time, loaded her ammunition with careful attention to consistency, and reviewed her ballistic calculations for the various shooting challenges she would face. The final demonstration was hours away, and Maria Rodriguez was ready to transform months of systematic sabotage into the opportunity of a lifetime. The conspiracy designed to destroy her career was about to become the platform for her greatest triumph. The morning of December 15th dawned cold and clear at Fort Bragg, with visibility extending for miles across the demonstration range. Perfect shooting weather, Maria thought as she watched the sunrise through the barracks window. The range had been prepared for weeks in advance, with targets positioned at precise distances and observation platforms constructed for the distinguished visitors who would witness the demonstration. By 0800 hours, military vehicles began arriving with guests who included 2 Army generals, several colonels from other installations, a delegation from the Pentagon, and 3 journalists from major defense publications. The media presence was exactly what Colonel Mitchell had wanted to ensure widespread coverage of what he expected to be Maria's spectacular failure and public humiliation. Maria dressed in her Class A uniform with meticulous attention to detail, knowing that every aspect of her appearance would be scrutinized by hostile observers looking for reasons to criticize her. Her ribbons and badges were positioned perfectly. Her boots were polished to a mirror shine, and her bearing reflected the confidence of a soldier who had nothing to fear from any challenge. The candidates assembled at the range control facility for final briefings and equipment assignments. Mitchell personally handed Maria her assigned rifle, watching her face carefully for any sign of recognition or suspicion. The weapon looked identical to the others, but Maria knew it had been carefully sabotaged to ensure her failure. She accepted it with professional courtesy, giving no indication that she understood his deception. Sergeant Bradley explained the demonstration format to the assembled candidates and guests. 8 soldiers would participate in increasingly difficult shooting challenges, culminating in a precision shooting course that would test the absolute limits of marksmanship skill. Maria had been scheduled to shoot last, ensuring maximum attention for her anticipated failure. Johnson took his position as a spotter and observer, carrying equipment that included the backup rifle concealed in a standard range bag. Chen positioned herself in the equipment staging area, ready to create the distraction that would allow Johnson to make the crucial equipment swap. Private Rodriguez had positioned himself among the media personnel with cameras prepared to document whatever happened. The first candidate began shooting at 0930 hours, engaging targets at ranges from 200 to 600 meters with competent but unremarkable accuracy. The crowd of observers watched with polite interest as successive candidates demonstrated solid fundamental marksmanship skills without exceptional brilliance. Mitchell and Bradley looked increasingly confident as they waited for Maria's turn to expose what they believed was the myth of female combat capability. General Patricia Williams, one of the visiting observers, watched the proceedings with particular interest. As the Army's highest-ranking female officer, she understood the significance of this demonstration beyond its stated purpose of showcasing sniper training excellence. She had heard rumors about exceptional performance by a female candidate, and she had also received unofficial reports of possible bias in the training program. When Maria's turn arrived, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something potentially historic, whether it was the vindication of integration policies or their definitive refutation. Maria approached the firing line with calm confidence, carrying the sabotaged rifle with professional competence while scanning the crowd for her allies. The first series of targets were positioned at 300 meters, well within the capability of any competent marksman. Maria settled into her shooting position, conducted her equipment checks, and began engaging targets with the sabotaged rifle. As expected, her shots scattered wildly despite perfect form and technique. The crowd murmured with disappointment as target after target remained untouched by bullets. that should have been easy hits for a qualified sniper. Mitchell and Bradley exchanged satisfied glances as Maria's official performance matched their expectations. The sabotaged rifle was performing exactly as designed, producing misses that could be attributed to poor marksmanship rather than equipment failure. Several observers shook their heads in disappointment, confirming their preconceptions about women in combat roles. But General Williams was paying closer attention to technical details that others missed. She noticed that Maria's shooting position, breathing technique, and trigger control were flawless despite the poor results. The disparity between perfect form and terrible accuracy suggested equipment problems, rather than shooter incompetence. She began watching more carefully for additional signs of what might be happening. Johnson was also monitoring the situation from his position in the spotter area. He could see through binoculars that Maria's shots were impacting far from their intended targets, in patterns consistent with scope miscalibration and barrel problems. The sabotage was working exactly as Mitchell had planned, but Johnson was ready to execute the equipment swap that would change everything. Maria continued engaging targets with the sabotaged rifle, deliberately varying her shooting technique to demonstrate different types of equipment failure. Her shots showed patterns consistent with scope problems, ammunition inconsistencies, and barrel defects. To untrained observers, she appeared to be struggling with basic marksmanship. But to experienced shooters, the patterns revealed systematic equipment sabotage. After 15 minutes of deliberately poor performance, Maria signaled Johnson by adjusting her shooting position in a predetermined manner. Johnson immediately began moving toward the equipment staging area, carrying the concealed backup rifle and ammunition. Chen created the planned distraction by accidentally spilling a container of cleaning supplies, drawing attention away from Johnson's activities. The equipment swap took less than 30 seconds, but it required perfect coordination between Maria, Johnson, and Chen. Maria announced a brief pause to clean her rifle, giving Johnson time to position the backup equipment within reach. When she resumed shooting, she had switched to the verified accurate rifle and match-grade ammunition that would allow her to demonstrate her true capabilities. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Maria's first shot with the backup rifle struck the center of a 400-meter target with surgical precision. Her second shot hit an adjacent target in exactly the same location. The crowd began paying closer attention as shot after shot found perfect placement despite the increased range and difficulty. Mitchell and Bradley initially attributed the improved performance to luck or coincidence, but as Maria continued hitting targets with mechanical precision, they began to realize that something had gone wrong with their carefully planned sabotage. They exchanged worried glances as the demonstration took on a momentum they had never anticipated. General Williams was now watching with intense interest, recognizing that she was witnessing exceptional marksmanship skill that rivaled anything she had seen in decades of military service. Maria's technique was flawless, her calculations were instantaneous, and her accuracy was approaching the theoretical limits of the equipment she was using. The crowd's mood shifted from polite attention to genuine excitement as Maria engaged targets at increasingly long ranges with consistent accuracy. At 800 meters, she placed 5 consecutive shots within a group smaller than a playing card. At 1,000 meters, she hit moving targets that required complex calculations for lead time and wind drift. The performance was becoming legendary even as it was happening. Maria felt a sense of calm focus that she had never experienced before. The months of systematic sabotage and psychological pressure had forged her into a marksman of extraordinary capability. Every shot was a statement of defiance against the conspiracy that had tried to destroy her career. Every perfect hit was proof that excellence could not be suppressed by prejudice and corruption. The media representatives were frantically taking notes and photographs, realizing they were witnessing a story that would dominate military news for weeks. Private Rodriguez captured everything on video, ensuring independent documentation of the historic performance. The demonstration had transformed from a routine training display into a defining moment for military integration policies. Johnson watched with pride and amazement as his friend delivered the performance of a lifetime. He had seen Maria shoot many times during training, but never with such sustained perfection under such intense pressure. Every aspect of their careful planning was working flawlessly, from the equipment swap to the media documentation. Chen observed from her position in the staging area, hardly believing that their audacious plan was succeeding so completely. She had risked her career to expose the conspiracy against Maria, and now she was watching justice being served in the most dramatic way possible. The corruption that had seemed so powerful and entrenched was being revealed as pathetically inadequate against genuine excellence. Colonel Mitchell was beginning to understand that his carefully planned trap had been turned against him. Instead of destroying Maria's career, the demonstration was establishing her as one of the most capable marksmen in military history. Worse, her sudden improvement in performance was raising obvious questions about what had happened during her previous training exercises. As Maria prepared for the final phase of the demonstration, she looked out at the crowd of observers and felt a profound sense of satisfaction. She had endured months of systematic sabotage and emerged stronger than ever. Now she would deliver a finale that would be remembered for decades as the moment when institutional prejudice met its match in the form of 167 perfect shots. The legend of Maria Rodriguez was about to reach its climax, and nothing could stop her now. The final phase of the demonstration began at 11:30 hours, with Maria having already exceeded every expectation and silenced most of her critics. But what happened next would transform her from an exceptional soldier into a legend that would inspire generations of military personnel. The remaining targets represented the ultimate test of marksmanship skill, designed to challenge even the most accomplished snipers in the world. General Williams stepped forward to personally observe the final sequence, positioning herself where she could clearly see both Maria's technique and the downrange results. As the Army's most senior female officer, she understood the historic significance of what was unfolding. She had also begun to suspect that Maria's earlier poor performance was the result of deliberate sabotage rather than incompetence. The final target array included precision targets at 1,200 meters, reactive targets that required hits within a 2-inch circle to activate, and a series of small steel plates suspended on nearly invisible wires. Maria would have exactly 167 rounds to engage all targets in a sequence that tested every aspect of advanced marksmanship skill, from long-range precision to rapid target transition. Colonel Mitchell watched with growing dread as Maria prepared for the final sequence. Her performance had already exposed the inadequacy of his sabotage efforts and raised uncomfortable questions about her previous training scores. If she completed the final sequence successfully, his career would be destroyed, and the conspiracy against her would be impossible to hide. Maria settled into her final shooting position with the calm confidence of a master craftsman approaching her greatest work. She had spent years preparing for this moment, from her childhood hunting expeditions in Texas to her months of secret preparation for this demonstration. Every shot would be a testament to her skill and a vindication of her right to serve in elite military units. The first target was a standard bullseye at 1,200 meters, challenging but within the capabilities of any qualified sniper under ideal conditions. Maria calculated wind speed, temperature effects, and atmospheric pressure with the automatic precision of someone who had performed these calculations thousands of times. Her shot struck dead center, producing a murmur of appreciation from the knowledgeable observers. Shot after shot found its mark with mechanical precision as Maria worked through the target sequence. At 1,200 meters, she placed 10 consecutive rounds within a group that measured less than 3 inches, a level of accuracy that approached the theoretical limits of the rifle and ammunition she was using. The crowd watched in stunned silence as she demonstrated marksmanship skills that few people had ever witnessed. Johnson served as her spotter, calling wind conditions and confirming target hits with professional efficiency. He had worked with Maria during countless practice sessions, but even he was amazed by the sustained excellence of her performance. Every aspect of their preparation was paying dividends as Maria executed shot after shot with flawless technique. The moving targets presented a different challenge, requiring split-second calculations of lead time and trajectory changes. Maria engaged these targets with smooth precision, tracking movement with her scope while making instantaneous adjustments for range and wind effects. Target after target fell to perfectly placed shots that demonstrated mastery of advanced ballistic principles. Private Rodriguez documented every shot with professional-quality video equipment, creating a permanent record of the historic performance. He understood that he was witnessing something that would be studied and analyzed by military marksmen for decades to come. The footage would serve as proof of what individual excellence could achieve despite institutional opposition. Chen watched from the equipment area with growing amazement as Maria continued her perfect performance. Every shot validated their decision to expose the conspiracy and risk their military careers for justice. The courage they had shown in supporting Maria was being repaid with a demonstration of capability that would change military policies and attitudes. General Williams was taking detailed notes on Maria's technique and equipment, recognizing that she was observing marksmanship instruction of the highest quality. Maria's shooting positions, breathing control, and trigger technique were textbook perfect, but executed with a level of consistency that suggested thousands of hours of dedicated practice. As Maria transitioned to the reactive targets, the difficulty level increased dramatically. These targets would activate only when struck within precise zones, providing immediate feedback about shot placement accuracy. Miss the activation zone by even a few millimeters, and the target would remain motionless, creating obvious evidence of imperfect shooting. Maria engaged the reactive targets with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the demonstration. Target after target activated on the first shot, producing metallic chimes that rang across the range like victory bells. The activation sequence created a rhythm that seemed almost musical as Maria worked through the array with clockwork consistency. Sergeant Bradley was no longer trying to hide his shock and dismay. The woman he had systematically sabotaged for months was delivering a performance that made him look like an amateur by comparison. His reputation as a marksmanship instructor was being destroyed by someone he had dismissed as inherently incapable of elite performance. The steel plate targets presented the ultimate challenge, combining long-range precision with rapid target acquisition and engagement. The plates were suspended on thin cables that allowed them to move slightly in the wind, requiring shooters to time their shots perfectly to ensure clean hits. Missing these targets would be obvious to everyone present. Maria approached the steel plate sequence with the focused intensity of a concert pianist performing a masterwork. Each shot required perfect timing, precise aim, and flawless execution under intense pressure. She engaged the targets with smooth efficiency, producing the distinctive ring of steel impacts that confirmed perfect shot placement. 100 shots, 125 shots, 150 shots. The perfect performance continued without a single miss as Maria worked through the most challenging marksmanship test ever devised. The crowd had fallen completely silent, recognizing that they were witnessing something that transcended normal athletic achievement. General Williams stepped closer to observe Maria's final shots, wanting to see every detail of the technique that was producing such extraordinary results. She noticed that Maria showed no signs of fatigue or stress despite the intense pressure and physical demands of the extended shooting session. Her breathing remained controlled, her positions remained stable, and her focus never wavered. The final target was positioned at maximum range and required a shot of exceptional difficulty. Maria would have to account for multiple wind changes, temperature variations, and the cumulative effects of barrel heating from her previous shots. Success would require perfect execution of every fundamental marksmanship principle. Maria took additional time to prepare for the final shot, knowing that it would complete the most extraordinary marksmanship demonstration in military history. She calculated every variable that might affect bullet flight, adjusted her scope for the precise conditions, and settled into her final shooting position with complete confidence. The range fell completely silent as Maria prepared to fire. Even the wind seemed to pause as she controlled her breathing, aligned her sights, and began her trigger squeeze with the same methodical precision she had shown for the previous 166 shots. The rifle fired, and for a moment that seemed to last forever. Everyone watched the bullet's flight toward its distant target. The impact was perfect, striking the target's center with an audible crack that carried clearly across the range. Maria had completed 167 consecutive perfect shots in a demonstration of marksmanship skill that would never be equaled. She had turned the conspiracy designed to destroy her career into the platform for the greatest triumph in military shooting history. The crowd erupted in spontaneous applause that continued for several minutes as the full significance of what they had witnessed became clear. General Williams was among the first to congratulate Maria, recognizing both her exceptional skill and the courage required to overcome the systematic sabotage she had endured. Colonel Mitchell's career ended that afternoon when General Williams launched a formal investigation into the training program's practices. The evidence of systematic equipment tampering and score manipulation was overwhelming, leading to courts-martial for Mitchell Bradley and several other personnel involved in the conspiracy. Maria Rodriguez became the first woman to graduate at the top of her class from the Army's elite sniper school, and her final demonstration score of 167 perfect shots became a record that has never been approached. She served with distinction in special operations units, and eventually founded a marksmanship training program that became the model for military shooting instruction worldwide. The story of her triumph over institutional prejudice and systematic sabotage inspired countless women to pursue careers in combat roles, proving that excellence knows no gender boundaries. Her name became synonymous with precision, persistence, and the power of individual achievement to overcome systemic corruption. 20 years later, Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez retired from active duty as the most decorated female soldier in Army history. Her legacy lived on in the hundreds of students she trained, and the policies she helped change through her extraordinary demonstration of what was possible when talent met opportunity. The conspiracy that was meant to destroy her had instead created a legend. The 167 perfect shots fired on that December morning became a symbol of triumph over adversity that continues to inspire soldiers around the world. Maria Rodriguez had not just turned the tables on her enemies, she had rewritten the rules of what women could achieve in military service.